My name is Lynn Rance, and I'm the head of school here, and it's my honor to welcome each and every one of you. I know our days are busy and our hours seem quick, and so I appreciate you taking the time to come tonight. Topeka Collegiate, in partnership with our parent association, is hosting this evening because of what we heard from our parents, that raising kids is our most important job, but it's also a very challenging, difficult job, and for many of us, it's our first time for a young person to be a tween or a teenager, going through all of the trials and tribulations that they're going through. And so, I don't know about you, but I never went to school to learn how to be a parent. And so when you don't go to school and you don't have specific training, sometimes it's a challenge. And so usually what we do best is we visit with our friends and neighbors and family members to try and gain some insight into how to help communicate and support and believe in our children even when they do the things that sometimes we don't like, but we still love them from the bottom of our heart. So this came about because parents in our community we were in frequent conversations, and our parent association said, why don't we bring some experts together to help guide us and be able to ask questions about all those things. So that's why we're here this evening. So I first want to thank our parent association, and Chris Williams, a parent of ours, took this on as kind of his way to serve our school, and so we really appreciate him. For those of you that are not familiar, Topeka Collegiate is a fully independent accredited school here in Topeka. We serve about 161 students. We start in preschool and we go through 8th grade. And we are a college preparatory school focused on humanitarian ideals and helping every student be prepared for college, high school, college, Peace Corps, military, whatever their dream is. We're helping them achieve their greatest goals. So if you haven't been here before, welcome. And if you are from here or if you've been here before, welcome back. Our panelists are coming in. A couple of reminders for tonight. Please mute, turn off your cell phones. Maybe that's something we're going to... So with that, I want to introduce Megan Milner. She is your moderator tonight. She has been working with young people for over 18 years. And I'm going to turn it over to her, and welcome to tonight.
We are very excited to have everyone here tonight. I sincerely hope no one leaves crying, and we maybe might have missed something if people leave crying, but welcome. We are excited. So I want to introduce our panelists to you, but first of all, I want to get a feel for who we have here tonight, so we know who our audience is. So just by a show of hands, how many people here tonight are parents? Okay, maybe how many people are not parents? Okay, we have a couple. All right. How many are parents of young elementary school age children? Okay, how about teenagers? Okay, how many people in here have a child who has some kind of social media account? Okay, very good. How many parents in here have a social media account? Okay, all right, very good. Well, that gives us an idea of who is in the audience tonight. So before we get started with questions, I want to introduce to you our panelists who are here tonight with us. So Don McWilliams on the far end is the Chief Executive Officer at the Boys and Girls Club here in Topeka. Valerie Peckham is a family and child psychologist and owns a private practice in Lawrence. Barry Feeker is a very familiar public figure here in Topeka and runs the Topeka Rescue Mission. Jeffrey Hall is a professor at the University of Kansas in the Department of Communication Studies. And Marie Myers is a school counselor at Farley Elementary School and has also done a Topeka TEDx talk on growing up tech. So it's a great one to watch. So I'd encourage you to go out and watch that. So without further ado, let's get into our topics tonight, which we are here to talk about resilience and communication in the age of social media. So I want to start out by defining what resilience is. So Barry, actually, if you could kind of start out and help us define what resilience is.
Well, I think my interpretation of resilience is going to be youth are able to survive the common age that we're in, when there is so much information coming at them. I think that there's never been a generation of children or parents who have had to deal with this in the whole history of the world. So I think that we're still learning to what those ramifications are of this information and the ability for children to be exposed to about anything in the whole globe with the click of a button. And so when that information comes to them, and it depends on what age they are, and depends upon what their home life is like, and a number of other factors, there are certain bits of information that can come at them that are going to really be a problem for them. And so resilience would be, what can we help that child to do in this new age with yet to be understood fully the impact of the information that's coming at them.
Thank you. And so what are some, just really for the group as a whole, what are some of the experiences that children that you're encountering, the kids that you encounter, that children are needing these skills of resilience? I mean, I think there's a whole spectrum of things where children need these skills. So talk a little bit about maybe what are some of the areas that we are seeing kids really needing these skills of resilience?
I think that resilience is, like you said, it's a spectrum. So helping children come back from some kind of setback is what resilience is. So for me, working with elementary age students, it could be that a student failed a test and we have to help them come back from that setback. It could be their parent has passed away, so how do we help them be resilient and come back from that? It could be a tragic event that has happened to many people. Maybe there was a school shooting. So how do we help the children come back from such a setback and cope and manage the hardship? The feelings that come with it should be acknowledged, but we have to help them move on from there and learn the lessons they should from that.
Mm-hmm. And so, I guess, help me understand when we're talking about resilience, Valerie, are there certain skills that are related to resilience?
Well, there's a lot of factors that come into play with resilience. Some of it can be genetic factors. Some children are just born a little bit more biologically able to recover and bounce back. And then there are environmental components that start to influence resilience, such as relationships and what's happening in their environment, like Marie said. So I kind of see resilience as just the ability to recover from a stressor or adversity.
And I think it's important to note that kids' brains and adult brains are completely different.
Yeah.
A kid's brain isn't fully developed until the age of 25. So when they're dealing with circumstances and issues and situations, they're coming from such a different place. Adults are able to utilize judgment. They're able to think through things. They're able to see and understand consequences because they use their prefrontal cortex. Kids are operating off their amygdala. It's all emotional. So allowing kids to see that failing the test or experiencing a loss, having them see that they're going to be able to make it through by showing them another situation that they were able to fully come through as well and everything was okay, or you came out a better person. You've got to understand that kids don't have that ability to process information or experiences the same way as adults. It's completely different. I know at the club, talk time is really important for our kids, but listening time is more important for our staff. We'll preempt a lot of our conversations with, do you want me to just listen or do you want me to respond? And half the time the kids are saying, I just need you to listen. Just listen to me.
Thank you for that. So I hear a couple of different things, and I guess the question that's coming to mind is resilience different than being optimistic? So the belief that everything's gonna be okay, is that different? Are they similar? Is it different than, I know one of the examples I use, I don't want my kid to experience some of these emotions, right? I want them to be happy. So what's the difference between resilience and optimism?
One thing I think about that is, I think optimism is a really important quality, but stress will happen in our lives. And so it's really important that people, kids, and everybody learn skills to recover from stress or to manage whatever comes at them. And so yeah, I definitely think it's different. It's more a set of skills or qualities than just an emotion or an outlook.
Okay.
I think it's also important for us to understand that science now helps us to understand that not everybody has the same ability, which we've always known, but there are certain stress factors in childhood, adverse situations that are going to shape that brain differently, poverty being one of those stressors. That if you take a child that comes from generational poverty, they've been food insecure, they've seen violence, they've seen gangs, they're around shootings, and you compare that to the child at the same age who hasn't experienced any of those, then you're really going to have two different approaches. And one individual that hasn't experienced that is going to be a whole lot more prone to being resilient, just because that's already what's happened. They've had those things that they've learned, it's been nurtured into them, where the other child really has a different shape of a brain at this point. And so their resilience is going to be very handicapped, or even the ability for them to learn in the same manner.
I have to dovetail a comment on that. We see that in a lot of the kids that are club members who live in those very challenging situations. Their ability to be resilient is amazingly impressive. We see other kids in different economic statuses where their parents are just really trying to kind of fly in there and protect, fix, and not allow them to have those stress experiences. I'll give an example of, we've got a 17-year-old employee who got written up for violating policy. The first thing that happened was mom called to deal with the situation. That's a situation that we need to work through with that individual. But that's becoming more of the norm, and I think that the title now is helicopter parents. But allowing kids to be able to experience stress is not necessarily a bad thing.
I talk a little bit about providing practice opportunities for kids when I work with parents, and I don't want kids to have to suffer or face unreasonable adversity if it's not necessary. But I think it can be helpful to provide kids with opportunities. Let them experience let them experience disappointment, let them experience conflict or tension in relationships, but then help them, guide them, and provide instruction and coaching on how to navigate those, so that, and those are the tools that we can learn to build resilience.
Can you give a little bit of an example of what something like that might look like for some of our parents?
Sure, and just broadly, I like to use the example of just saying no to kids. When kids want a particular Christmas gift or holiday gift or birthday gift or whatever, and even though it's something that is within the budget and it's something that we can buy, maybe we should go ahead and say, no, that's not going to happen this time, and allow a child to kind of experience some of that disappointment. That's not harmful, but it does give a good opportunity to learn and practice. So.
I think too, working in schools, I see the helicopter parents, and what they're doing is they want to scoop up their child and save them, and I understand that, but those are the moments to teach them resilience. Talking through the mistake that they've made, whether it was that they didn't study for the test or they didn't do the homework and get it turned in, they were disrespectful to their teacher, whatever it was. Let them own up to their mistake and then talk them through the mistake. What could you have done differently? How are you going to handle this next time it occurs? Because the fact is, we can't expect children to be resilient if we don't give them opportunities to make mistakes and then fix the mistakes.
I think there's room to look at the potential that resilience is not always positive. And what I mean by that is that some children will learn resilience out of the necessity of survival. And those kind of things that they do learn, for example, some of the children we work with, they'll come home from school, but they don't know which home they're going to go to. And so if you repeat that for a lengthy period of time. Everybody's kind of got that situation sometimes where something happens, the water breaks or something. But if there's drug addiction or human trafficking or violence in a home, and the child literally leaves school, and I wonder if I'm going to stay at this house tonight, this house tonight, or this house tonight, they develop a different kind of resilience. That at some point in life, they're going to be tough, for sure, but then how do you mold that into a more productive way of being resilient so that it's not just survival and the next thing you do is you do something that is going to be negative with resilience versus something positive.
How does that happen? How do you mold someone who has had those experiences?
That's tough. The longer someone is living in a phase of insecurity in their life, they don't have stability, and that resilience develops. They basically survive on their own. Trust of someone else having something that they can offer them because they've never had that before takes a very, very long time. It takes relationship development to the point that it may take months, if not years, if maybe ever. So our prisons are full, our shelters are full, sometimes the streets get full with people who really have just learned to just do it on their own. At the same time, at the core of that being is this search for significance, this search for, do I matter? And when everybody has told them, especially at an early age, they don't matter. You're on your own. And that literally does happen, even in this community. There are many, many young people that really don't feel that they matter. Then they have to shut out the world outside. And then when somebody shows up and says, hey, you matter, they're going, no, I don't. So they become resilient, but it's in a very negative fashion. So what we attempt to do is just continue to pour into them that they really do matter, and it takes a very long time, but they've got to bridge over from their way, their system, into exploring an unknown system that we want to make them resiliently healthy versus destructive, and that takes a long time. It's about relationships, though.
So are there, so I guess, I'm sorry, let me start over. So I'm hearing that parents play a very critical role. Adults, caregivers, play a very critical role when it comes to building healthy kids and building kids who thrive. And it's possible to take a child who has experienced some significant trauma or adverse experiences. What are some of the very specific things that parents can do to help build these skills with kids?
I think it's imperative that you be present. And what I mean by that is, I had an experience last night where we had 174 kids go to the Kansas Children's Discovery Center last night to just have play, just fun. And that was happening. And there was a little girl, and she was trying to build this construction thing, and it kept falling over. And it was a night that was built to have family time, so it was the kids and the parents. And I was kind of observing this little girl working on this little construction piece that she was doing, and she kept on trying to get her dad's attention, but he was on his phone. And she kept on looking over, and it would fall over, and she'd look to see if her dad noticed. And it continued to happen, and finally she leaned over and she said, Dad, could you please help me with this? He was like, just a minute. So I was just kind of walking around looking to kind of see if, it was maybe some, text or something that couldn't wait, it was work or something, and he was on Facebook. And just the look of defeat in her face, because all she wanted was her dad's attention and for him to be present with her in that moment. The other thing that we try to have conversations with our parents is our kids wait all day long for their parents or their caregivers to pick them up. And nothing is more disappointing to see a parent come in on their cell phone and ask to get their kid up front. They don't get off the cell phone, and the kid's like, I gotta tell you what I just did. And they're just, and then you just see it. You just see their body language, you just see, the look of defeat, and being present, and just being, interested, involved, You don't have to know the ins and outs of Pokemon, but just to be able to engage in that conversation on something that's important to that kid or what happened to them that day is so invaluable. It means so very, very much. We've seen the looks and the experiences that these kids have, and I cannot emphasize how important it is for you to be present. It's common for us to pick our phones up, whether it be at the dinner table, whether it be at home, when you're driving at a stoplight. Use all of those moments to just be present with your kids and to listen to the nonverbal and the verbal dialogue that's going on, and that will carry so much weight with them.
I completely agree with that, and the word I like to use is attunement, to be attuned with your child and aware of what's happening with them. And talking on cell phone and adults being distracted, and adults are faced with all the distractions that children are faced with. And so I think it's really important for adults to engage in appropriately healthy self-care, put boundaries around themselves as far as the way that they manage their time, the way that they manage their media, and give themselves permission to engage with their kids, because that happens too. Adults get pulled in so many directions, and so being aware of that pull and refocusing, this is where I am right now. Yeah.
I agree with that too. Children are such a model of what their parent is, and so there's so many times that I work with a student, I've been counseling them, I really know that student really well, and then their parent comes in and I get a chance to talk to their parent, and I'm just like, it makes sense. I mean, they're a mirror image of each other, and so that can be amazing, and it can also be detrimental if what you're showing your child is that every time you make a mistake, you throw a big fit, you say, I'm going to get fired from my job, I can't do this, I'm so overwhelmed. They hear what you're saying. If you are having your own body issues and you're calling yourself fat and you're nitpicking your body, then no surprise your children are going to do the same thing. So your child is an exact replica of you, and believe it or not, they do hear everything you say, and so if they see you on your cell phone all the time, then they're going to be on a device all the time. So we have to model in ourselves exactly what we want for our children, and that can be hard sometimes. It means we have to be more present. We have to build relationships, because relationships build resiliency in children. That's so important, to have conversations, know who your child is, know more than anybody else in the world knows about your child, because the reality is they might not always be here, you might not always be here, so don't leave time to make regret, or regret something that might not have happened.
Do you think that puts a lot of pressure on parents?
Well, the question, why do parents want to spend more time away from their children versus with their children? What's missing in that parent's life? I think that's what a parent has to ask. Why? I've got somebody right here who is my own kid, and why am I more interested in what's here on this device? And probably it isn't always work. It's social. And why am I reaching out for a social interaction through this when I've got that? And to really be honest about how I really feel about myself and what's lacking in my own life, and rather than it's important for parents to decide to stop. Why is it so hard to stop? Why do I need that on this electronic device or the telephone or whatever versus what I have in my own home right in front of me? That's a hard question.
It's so hard to stop because the smartest people and the most money is being spent to buy our time,
Right.
to get our attention. I mean, Silicon Valley is full of the smartest people on the planet with tons and tons of money figuring out how to capture our attention. And that's what we're competing with. So it isn't just this, I mean, although we are reaching out for social reasons, as you say, there's tons of other reasons that it's really hard to pull ourselves away from the phone.
So we're being drawn in by the hook for things that they know that are going to appeal to us, things that are going to attract us away from a real person.
I think that I don't think that their actual intention is to pull us away from people per se. It's to pull us towards the device. Remember, I mean, this has actually been very pertinent in the recent conversations about Facebook and the way in which that they've pirated our data, our identities, social information about us. And one of the things that's come up, which I think is a really good lesson for us to keep in mind, is that if the service is free, you're the service, you're the product, right? What that means is all of the things that we're doing there are being monitored, tracked, recorded for the purpose of selling your information to everyone else, right? So in some sense, we have to be aware of that. I think there's always an underlying understanding of what the purpose of social media or other media for that matter are, and that's to basically either sell advertising or to sell information about you and your behavior. And those things can be linked. The other thing I might mention is that we always have to remember, too, that these devices actually have functionalities which are intended to keep our attention. So simple on phone-wise, things like buzzes, beeps, flashing lights, these are really hard to actually not attend to. We become actually very accustomed to attending to them. And in fact, I don't remember who said it, but the idea that we check it every moment when we're pulling it out of our pocket or at a stoplight or other places, and don't text and drive. It's a bad idea, just in general, right? But that said, people definitely do that. What I'm saying is that these sorts of moments provide us cues where we become accustomed, habituated to the process of checking every moment. The other thing I think we want to keep in mind here is that there are a lot of media functions that are meant to keep wrapping us in. So the way that these devices are created is that they're actually meant to come to an end of a screen and then feel compelled to move to the next part of that screen, to keep scrolling, to keep going on. The one that I think a lot of people are familiar with is if you watch Netflix on your computer, it actually starts the next movie, right?
Yeah.
For you. And I actually feel, in some ways, I feel lucky that when we have Netflix at our home and our kids watch it, the show stops and it goes back to the menu before. So the kids understand that's the end of that, right? Which, by comparison, if Netflix had their way, our kids would never stop seeing, the episode never ended. Why would I stop? So I would say that in some ways that, although I actually think that there's also something else on your comment that I might point out, is that the broad debates about social media right now are perhaps a little more mixed than you may have heard about what's the role of social media in actually causing or leading to things like loneliness or depression or anxiety or things like that. The evidence of the causal factor of these things are actually not great. There's a really good reason that they're correlated, meaning that people who are lonely, people who are depressed, people who are socially anxious, or people who are isolated do use social and mobile media so as to look or find ways to satiate those needs to belong or that sense that you're disconnected from others. But the evidence that it causes it isn't as good. The reason this might be the case is, I think, as you say, well, if there is something actually lacking in us, a sense of loneliness or isolation or depression, we do tend to use social media more. So one way to think about this is that social media may be more of a thermometer, right, than the virus. It's actually the thing that tells you whether or not you're sick. So heavy use of it is indicative of perhaps somebody who's not doing well, rather than that thing being the cause of it.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I don't think we always think of social media. We see the device as being the problem. And so we've kind of moved to talking about this topic of social media, which I think is of a lot of interest to a lot of people here tonight. And so at some point I want to wrap back around and talk about communication. But while we're on this topic of social media, I'm curious, and I know, Jeffrey, you've done a lot of work when it comes to communications and relationships and how we develop relationships and why we develop relationships. But can you talk a little bit about the impact that social media has had on our ability to establish relationships with other people?
Yeah, so I think that's something to contextualize. A lot of my research is on adults. I'm much more versed and aware of research about how adults use social media and the effects on that. I'm starting on a new research area with a clinical child psychologist at the University of Kansas to think about how adolescents and children do as well, trying to extend the idea of digital stress and issues related to social media into that domain. The one thing I point out here is that we have to remember that what is social media used for, how do people use it? The metaphor that I like to actually use is I think that social media more than anything is like people watching than it is like social interaction. And people watching is something that goes back a long time. I'm actually a huge people watcher. I love people watching, sitting around, looking at what people are doing, watching their behavior. It's actually pretty normal, and there's a good reason to believe that people throughout time and history and all over the planet like to people watch. Social media gives you a chance to people watch of people that you actually kind of like through a device. And you might like them because you know them, which is a good portion of people, for example, on something like Facebook or on Snapchat. But it also might be people that you don't know that you really like maybe a famous musician or a famous actress or someone that you think is really attractive or someone who's really interesting or putting something really funny up. So the idea is that this people-watching phenomena pulls us in because it's something that's a little more engaging and a little more interesting than that moment of time that you turned away from whatever you were doing. A lot of research on social media suggests that people move to it at moments they're trying to avoid doing something else, right? So you may have experienced this in your job where you spend, you're like done with that project, I'm going to spend about 10 minutes checking in on social media, go back to work, if you go back to work. Which, as I mentioned, the people who own social media companies don't want you to do at some level. The other part I might mention is that once you also take the people watching part and say, okay, that's a good proportion of what people do when they're on social media. It's actually, by the way that I estimate, somewhere to the effect of about somewhere between 60 and 75% of what people are doing when they're on it. They're just looking, watching, observing. They may like a little bit, but one-click likes are not interaction. The other thing is that there's a reserve, though, for really interactive behavior. Interactive behavior would be texting, chatting, things like that. The reason that I think that these two things are different is that they actually serve very, very different functions. Interactive behavior, whether through text, whether through Snapchat, whether through other devices that your children or you might use, have actually an affective and social component, meaning that we put information in those texts to actually relay a relational and effective message. In doing so, we actually have the possibility of connection. There's actually good reason to believe that the most beneficial things we can do through social media is increase the chances that people will engage with us either face-to-face or through other some media over time. So what I'm getting at is if we engender the feeling that other people want to talk to us, text us, call us, spend time with us, that's actually the most positive thing that social media can do. Notice that probably doesn't happen by just clicking and watching. So if you think about it, when we think about social media use, we cannot think about social media use as a monolithic, singular behavior. It's a set of assorted behaviors which are really specific on terms of different function, and also the who is big. When we text, when we communicate with other people through texting or Snapchat, it's usually people we know, usually people we like, and usually people we're kind of close to. When we browse, look, strangers, acquaintances, old friends, ex-flings, people you knew one day once, right? All kinds of folks. We're people watching. That, generally speaking, has a kind of a slightly negative association with feeling pretty good because it just makes you feel like you wasted your time.
Well, there's a certain expectation, too. If somebody texts me, and we're on a group text, and I don't respond, then it's kind of like, I'm being rude. And we've tried to set protocols at what we do at the rescue mission, that there's certain levels, don't text unless it's an emergency. But people violate that, so
Right.
when they text them, okay, we better respond because we want to keep in the protocol, and then I have to choose somebody out about it. But yeah, there's the expectation. So if you've got your child over here and they're missing the contact, it could be because there is this forced social expectation on us to respond.
I'm curious if anybody has any anxiety yet they haven't looked at their phone. I mean, honestly, I'm sure that there's some sense of urgency because you haven't looked at it for a little bit. It's probably been pretty hard.
So social media isn't always a bad thing.
It depends, almost like everything else in life, on how you use it.
But it has changed our ability, and it has changed our ability to connect with other human beings.
Yes, it has.
Okay.
So the one thing that I think about, and what you bring up actually I think is an interesting idea here, is that so we want to think of these two types of stresses in slightly different ways. One of them is what my colleagues and I are talking about as being kind of a normative stress. This is the normative stress of figuring out how do I use this device? Should I really respond to these group texts? Is this like email or is this like social media? What the heck's going on with this thing? Am I obliged to respond? There's a lot of weird normative things that are being sorted out. A lot of those normative things are stressful though, especially for young folks because they feel so compelled to respond. It's really hard to explain to young people that they don't need to respond. It's confusing. They're like, yes, I do. I have to respond. So that's normative stress. And that normative stress is powerful because, and you all well know this as parents, that period of time in life is the most important for peer development, right? Being able to develop friendships, friendships that you may keep for your entire life, people that you made in junior high, high school, and college. Up until the point your brain's fully developed. This is a critical time of social development. What that also means, though, is for a lot of adults, that period actually wanes off, where the people in your home, your significant other, your kids, your parents become most central to your life, and friends tend to push away. The kind of stress that actually comes with this beep, buzz, alert, notification, etc., is more of what we call sort of like a stress of being overwhelmed or digital stress. That's also stressful, but those things actually can be handled by managing the device itself, turning it off, setting it aside, turning it to gray screen, right? Making it on silent. All kinds of things you can do to manage the technical side of the stress, and are all, by the way, buried things. You have to learn how to do that. It's not like your phone comes on the easy mode, it comes on the exciting mode. But these are different, these are critically different stresses, I think, for helping young people manage them. Because one really is a social function. They don't know, do I really obliged to respond to my family all the time? Or am I really obliged to respond to my work colleagues all of the time? The other one is, dude, this device, I just need to shut up. Like, I just need to get it out of my life. And that's something, I think there are two different approaches we have to take to each.
Well, I think also too, I think it also affects how kids feel about their own self-worth. How many likes they get. There's such a depiction of faulty perfection in social media with the airbrushing and the photo things that they can do. And, kids these days, the stress that they have just on trying to be something that nobody even can attain to is really convoluting just their own sense of self, which is very unfortunate. And again, to have those conversations about, what's real and what's not real, what's authentic, and how important being authentic really is. I've got to credit the program that you've got going here. I mean, that was just so, I wanted to talk to them for another hour. It's amazing to be proud of who you are and what you have, and not be trying to live up to some image that is completely going to be disappointing in the very end, because that's not who you really aspire to be or want to be.
I think, too, something I've noticed in myself and my peers is that we, even as adults, are very influenced by what we see on social media. So I'm sure many of you out there, you have friends, close friends, that take these perfect family photos, so cute, and they post the best pictures from their holidays or their celebrations. They've made the perfect birthday cake for their child, and you feel like, wow, this family really has it together. They do fun activities. They always have delicious meals. They always have their hair brushed. Look at this family. And how many photos did they probably take to get that? How many times have you taken 100 pictures before you posted one, but you made sure that you put a filter on it, a little airbrushing, maybe put a little text in the corner over something to hide it. So I think what we post online is not our true selves. The statuses I choose to write, I might mull over for a while. The things that I'm going to post to my Facebook aren't necessarily the conversations I'm going to have with my friends. And so we feel so influenced, just like our children do, by being what we see online. And that is not what people really are.
And I think sometimes you also have people putting a sense of what they believe to be cool up on a picture that has lifelong impacts on who they are and who they become. We see so many young people who will look up to gangs or, look up to a behavior that they think is cool, whether they take a picture with themselves with a gun or some drugs or doing a sign because they think it looks cool. And again, they're in the emotional aspect of thinking. They're not thinking about the rational aspects of their decision, that this may cause you not to get a job. This may cause you to lose your job. as an employer, that's one of our #1 checkpoints is Facebook. It tells a lot about a person, but again, it's the person that person is putting up there. So.
Yeah, and if we as adults are so susceptible to seeing things on social media or to wanting to present ourselves in a certain way, can you imagine the kids who, as Jeffrey, I think you were talking, and I think Dawn, you were talking earlier about just the brain development, that kids are not developed, how much more susceptible are they to want to look a certain way? So the other thing I want to bring up, Marie, you mentioned something when we were talking before about I'm not going to say it right, imaginative play and how social media impacts that. So not only does social media impact our interactions with other individuals, but talk a little bit about that.
So something I researched and looked into, because I work with kids and I've just wondered how is technology affecting children and changing their experience. Something so important and vital for children is imaginative play. And what that is what you think of as playing pretend. Children need to play to learn how to socially interact. They need to play to learn how to problem solve and to learn societal roles. So when a child plays Legos in his building, or when a child is setting up a restaurant and serving you their delicious meals, they're playing, and that is very important. And so what's happening, because of the amount of time we're giving our children on devices and the young age we're giving those devices to children, that play isn't happening. And so what's happening to children is they're actually not going through all the stages of development that they should be going through. They're skipping stages. And so children's brains are developing differently. They're not getting all those social cues that they should be getting. They're not practicing how to talk to people. Also, just a little bit different, but children aren't developing their speech in the same way that they would have in the past, because children aren't speaking. They're not required to speak as much now that we give them devices so much. There's so many children that are entering kindergarten and are what we'll call nonverbal. They don't talk. They haven't talked, or they selectively talk. They don't have the speech that sounds that they should have, because so much they're looking at a screen, they're playing a game, they're watching videos online, and they're not talking. It's that simple. Children need to be talking. They need to be having interactions before they're going to school, while they're in school, because if they're not practicing it, then it doesn't happen.
One thing I think about is kids learn how to be human by watching other humans. And so kids learn how to be grown-up humans by watching their grown-up parent humans, and kids learn how to be older kids by watching grown-up older kids. And so if we're modeling how to be human, and so if they learn how to be human like this, then that's how they learn how to be human. And so we do need to talk, we need to play with them, we need to engage in imaginative play with children, and we need to help them learn how to navigate and negotiate relationships and conflict and tension and all of it. So I think there's definitely some awareness and mindfulness in that aspect of just how are we teaching the little kids how to be humans, big humans.
We were having a great conversation in the room earlier about friendships, and I hope that you share some information about your research on that. It was fascinating to me about the number of hours that would define a true friend and a great friend and a best friend. But when you talk to kids, we'll have, a kid come up to us and say, well, I have 365 friends. They don't understand the depth of what that means. Or I think the #1 career these days, when you ask a kid what they want to be when they grow up, is a YouTuber. And so all of the other aspects of truly thinking about life overall and social development is being lost because so much is engaged. And so I think that's a great segue into the friendship conversation.
I think that's a great
It's fascinating.
Well, I might say a couple of different things here, but to start, one of the things when Megan and I were talking on the phone when we were getting started, reminded me of a conversation we had about the idea of both and rather than either or. One thing to think about here is technology is not going anywhere. This is this is the direction that things are going, right? We are going in a direction in which that the more connectivity is going to be greater, the ways in which they're going to capture our attention are going to be more. The jobs that our children, we aspire them to have, are largely jobs which are going to require technology and are engaging with technology in ways that we can't even imagine quite yet. So in some ways, that's one side of this. We cannot shut down or expect that children stop their technological development and literacy of that tech, right? So there are things to believe that there are valuable things that are being developed on that. Now, I would like to go to a comment you made earlier. Absolutely, limits should be set, right? Time should be set aside and places should be set aside where tech is not part of life. Media is limited. These are absolutely important things for parents to do. That said, that's one part of it. The both and is the other part, is the social part. There's also good reason to believe that being able to interact with people isn't going anywhere either, right? That the importance of having a relationship still is critical. And in my research, still we're looking at 75% of any person's interactions, social interactions during the day is face-to-face, and an additional 10 to 15% is actually on the phone. It's a tiny percentage that are left for tech that are socially interactions. What this means is that we still need to develop good social skills, ability to communicate and otherwise. So it's both and rather than either or. But specific to friendship, the research they're referring to is, I did a project on the number of hours it takes to make a friend. So the idea is, how long after meeting someone do you have to spend with them before you can call them a friend? So this is a personal friend, not just an acquaintance. And then how does that progress to from a casual friend to a friend and a close friend? So it takes roughly about 40 to 60 hours to develop a casual friend. This is a lot of time spent with somebody. There's a lot of time interacting with them, playing with them, spending time with them. And I think that the idea here is we want children to actually develop those friendships. Absolutely is true. So having rules to say, if you're going to play with your friend when they're over, we put the TV away, we put the media away, we put the Kindle away, whatever. You're going to be playing with them while they're here. That makes sense to me, right? That you're going to be doing things that are interactive and fun and constructive. That makes sense to me. And these are important limitations. Now, but we should also remember for our older kids that they want to interact with their friends when they're home kind of makes sense. Maybe they want to send a snap. Maybe they want to have a text. Maybe they want to interact at home. That's also okay. I don't know about all of you, but I actually talked to my girlfriend after I wasn't supposed to at night by calling her to time and temperature and then call waiting, clicking over. Right? I did that. I totally did that, right? Now, granted, I was 16, but you may have 16-year-olds in your house who want to interact with their new girlfriend. They're excited about that romantic development. The thing is some researchers, and one who I recommend to everyone in this audience, is a great book by Dana Boyd calling It's Complicated. It talks about these issues. Dana Boyd, B-O-Y-D, It's Complicated. One of the things she points out in the book, which I think is really useful for us to keep in mind, is part of what's happening is that kids are trying to express themselves socially, make contacts with their friends from school, because we're more comfortable that they stay home than leave our houses. She makes a pretty compelling point that we are living in times that are not just tech-heavy, we're living in times where kids don't go outside because parents are nervous. They're worried about their kids going out to public spaces. There are more restrictions about where kids can play unattended. A story that my wife and I are always flabbergasted to have heard is that parents getting called social services when they let their kids go out and play at the park, right? I went on my bike at like 12 all around Topeka without a helmet. I mean, the fact that I'm still alive is amazing. But the point I'm trying to make here is, let's remember the broader social context. And the broader social context also says that we are expecting our kids to learn technology for the future. We're expecting our kids to still develop good face-to-face social skills, but we may not be giving them the opportunities to spend time one-on-one in open public spaces because there aren't as many as there used to be. We're less comfortable with our kids leaving our house. We prefer them in the safety of our home. And then they want to send a snap. They want to have a phone call. They may have done it in time and temperature back in 1990 something, but, right, they're still looking to connect with their friends. That was a very long answer, by the way. I'm sorry.
No, that's wonderful. As you're talking, I'm sitting here thinking, I'm a parent of young children, and part of me thinks, and I've had this conversation with some people, that for a lot of parents, this is absolutely new territory for us. And we had a great conversation, Jeffrey, where you said, but is this a phenomenon that we've never had to deal with before?
Right.
Can you talk about that?
So what I think is new is the mobility and the connectivity is different in the sense that the device, because it's mobile, because it's wireless, has given us opportunity to connect in a way that has never before. That's totally true. But tech obsession is not new. The Department of Communication Studies and communication departments throughout the country have been obsessed with saying, what's the harm of TV, right? This has been going on since the 50s. So grandparents in the audience, right? People, TV is going to ruin our kids, right? Did you know that they were scared that radio was going to ruin their kids too? And I always like to point out this as a person who studies communication is, Plato was worried that people would actually be worse off because they were becoming literate rather than oral in remembering the traditions. Not kidding. In the Republic, he concerned about this. This is a long-standing concern that tech is going to ruin us. It happened in the late 90s with the internet. It happened again with computer games being on the rise. It's happened with the original social media, which was Friendster and that kind of stuff. Now it's happening again with apps and devices on the mobile phone. These cycles of worry and concern are actually pretty common. And what usually happens is we realize is that they're displacing one another. They're borrowing time from each other. So basically one tech comes along and then replaces the next tech, which replaces the next one. So there is a degree to which this is unfamiliar territory, and we don't know what to do with it. And I as a parent, I share that anxiety. But let's keep it, in some ways, kind of a calm and reasoned discourse. This is part of a broader trend in our society that is going to be with us and has been with us before, and we're doing okay. We're generally doing okay.
So there's a question I know as a parent I've asked, and I've heard other parents ask too. How do you know when your child is ready to have a social media account? Like, it'd be great if there was a manual for something like this. I could really benefit from that, but I know that doesn't exist. So is there an age, or how do you know when your child's ready to have a cell phone or to start a social media account?
Well, a lot of the apps that are out there have age restrictions. So when you click that terms and agreement that you read through every time, there states an age in there that they're recommending a child be before they use that. And a lot of the apps, the age is 13, 16. So I know, I work in a school, I know what they're doing. There's a lot of kids that have Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, and they're younger than the age requirement for that. And so that right there should be your first go-to. Are they legally supposed to have this app? But then I think it's not a black and white answer. It's who is your child and what can they handle? I think researching the app before you let them try it. There's a lot of apps that are being used by sexual predators, by people who are looking for children. There's a lot of apps that have very negative sides to them, and they do let our children be social. However, they also have so much hidden within them that our children can be put in dangerous situations. So thinking about who your child is and what they can handle, making sure that you're monitoring how they're using those apps. But I think so important, research what that app is before you allow them to use it. Because as much as apps do let our children be social, something I see as a school counselor is that apps are also increasing things like bullying. I would say 80% of the bullying cases that come into my office are online. They are not happening at school. They're happening in a place that our children actually can't escape. So they're getting those notifications, I need to check my phone. Well, what are they checking it for? Something that somebody's saying to them that's causing them to have self-doubt. Things that are having the effect of increasing suicidal thoughts in children. And so you have to ask yourself, am I willing to give my child an app that could be the outlet for them to have these kinds of interactions with people, and I might not know about it. So, long answer, but
Thank you. I think we have a few minutes, and I want to make sure we leave some good time for people to ask questions, because I see you all furiously writing down a lot of questions out there for our panelists. One of the things, and we've had some themes of this as we have been talking, but we've talked about the importance of parents, or really even in a broader context, teachers, coaches, mentors, supportive adults who are a part of helping kids to navigate these life stressors that kids encounter, all the way from a bad grade on a test to something as severe as even an adverse living environment or a traumatic experience or a school shooting. When we talk about having a supporting or a supportive relationship, what does that mean? Because supportive can mean a lot of different things. So what is that for us as adults? What does that mean for us to be supportive to kids?
One of the things that I think about with that is being kind of willing to truly discover what your child's needs are. And so we can say things like a supportive relationship is accepting, and it's open to listening, and it's all of those things, and all of that is true. But I think also we want to, as a parent or as a trusted caregiver or adult mentor for a child, it's really discovering what that child needs and trying to adapt and meet that particular child's needs. So that's a big piece of it anyway.
Any other thoughts on what it means to be supportive, a supportive adult?
Jeffrey mentioned many children stay at home. I know in the neighborhood we live in, there was children everywhere. It's a real transit neighborhood, and people move in and out, so there's lots of new kids coming in. We hardly see any kids in the yards anymore. Exactly what you're talking about. It's kind of nice, flowers stay in place now. But you know, I think parents, they do overprotect. They think that they're in the protection of the home, that they're okay, so they just let them do whatever in the home because they're afraid of the landmines that exist outside of the home. Unfortunately, the internet is a landmine field. There's flowers over here, there's green grass over here, and there's explosives everywhere along the way. And children are not going to be able to discern those things. It's like those apps. And so to be supportive, to be a part of your child's life, you have to have a good enough relationship with them to where you can have that open conversation and help them to understand this is a great world we live in, that you can go out and enjoy the flowers and enjoy the valleys and the meadows and the streams, but there unfortunately is quicksand, landmines, there are things that are out there, and have that open dialogue with them. And unless we do that, our kids are going to find those. And are we better off today? We didn't used to have school shootings. We didn't have the amount of suicides that we have, teen suicides. It becomes an epidemic, and certainly as I was talking with people from Stanford today, they were in Topeka, and they've had a rash of youth suicides. It's a cyclic type thing. And how are kids learning about it? How are they being drawn into that kind of a system because they found the landmines? And they're communicating with each other in this hopelessness. And somewhere along the line, somebody healthy in their lives is not intervening. Probably because they don't have a pre-arranged understanding of where they can go with a positive relationship at home.
To dovetail on what Barry's saying, I love that nature analogy, you know, going out into the world and experiencing the meadows and the streams. And I think about with kids, if we can teach them what poison ivy looks like, then they'll know it when they see it, and they won't try to pick it and smell it and make a little daisy chain necklace out of it. And so I think about that. So knowing what a landmine looks like, knowing what, and so of course developmentally appropriate. We don't want to scare kids unnecessarily, but helping them begin to identify what does risk look like, what does danger look like, what does it feel like when you feel the uh-oh feeling? You know, when you sense that this is weird.
And to know they're going to grab the poison ivy sometimes.
Right, you're going to brush up against it.
Right,
sometimes.
or maybe they're going to say, I don't believe them. Got it.
Got it.
And then they're going to, ooh. And then so process that with them and understand, okay, you made a mistake. You learn from that. And to have that supportive, not like, well, I told you not to do it. You did it. You're a bad kid. No, you're a good kid. But we just don't have those kind of relationships in many of our homes today, to where there's that supportive environment. And we got a school like this is way different. Many of the people that we work with, it's not anywhere like this. And it's not because the parents decided to be bad parents. It's because they didn't have parents. And the parents before them didn't have parents. And when I say they have parents, biologically, yes, but socially and supportively and everything that goes into what we would consider a parent, they don't have. There's good research now in regards to generational welfare, generational poverty. And yes, there's a social environment about this, a social aspect to it, but there's also a biological aspect too in regards to the way that the brains are shaped. And so there are many, many people that suffer and pass along a propensity towards staying in poverty, not just only by socially, but because of the environment that they live in and how their brains respond to that environment. And so it's not one size fits all here in regards to resiliency or in regards to the technology, because there are some people that really don't start at the same level. And what we're going to do as a nation is going to be very, very critical in the future, because they have hit the landmines, they have grabbed a hold of poison ivy, and unfortunately that's what they always do, and nobody's helping them out of it.
And I think that is what is truly a supportive relationship. When you have those young people who have endured so much trauma and so much unfortunateness at no cause of their own, to let those kids know that they have value and what that means to have value, that they are important, regardless of whatever situation that they have dealt with or been through. A lot of times their depiction of that is just the norm, and that's how things are. And they have this perception as being a bad kid. You know, we have a saying at the Boys and Girls Club, there's no bad kids. There's bad behavior, there's bad consequences, but to be supported is to find value in every single person that you come in contact with. And those kids need to feel valued. And once you see that, you see a different kid, because they have a different sense of self.
You know, I think also, hearing what you're saying and even hearing what Barry was saying about grabbing the poison ivy, I think making it known in your relationship with your child that mistakes are allowed, and that when you make a mistake or when you make a poor decision or a poor choice, that will help you, you know, either repair it or navigate it or recover from it, and that can be a big factor in that too.
Parents will feel like they're failures when their children make mistakes. I mean, we all have that problem. We have to help each other as parents to understand that we're going to make mistakes as parents, our kids are going to make mistakes, and one of the things that, even though we're so socially connected through all these electronic devices and all this other jazz, we still are afraid that people will find out what we're really like. And we do put that out on Facebook. I don't have one, but I understand how it works. You put the best picture forward. You do that because you want everybody to think this is who you are. And how many times you mentioned how many times you take that picture to get their perfect one. Parents feel isolated.
So we've only barely scratched the surface with the conversation. But I would like to take some time to answer any questions that you all might have for the panelists. This is your big opportunity to ask the experts. Are there any questions that you all have? We have one right down here in the front.
If you just raise your hand, we'll have one of our students bring the microphone so we can all hear you.
And you can ask a question for all the panelists, or if you want to direct a question to one in particular, feel free to do that as well.
Thank you so much for your great answers and advices. It's really helped some of our questions today. One of the, I have young children, so one of the common question I get, one of my classmates, or several of my classmates have a phone today. Why can't I get a phone? I'm not, I didn't get a phone until I was 20, so obviously I'm opposed to it. So it makes me feel like, am I not doing the things other people? It's like a peer pressure for me. How do you, help us find out what we can do for that?
Great question.
That's a great question. One thing that, go ahead. I was just going to say that one thing that I think about is planning your parenting And so parents kind of have to be a couple, 2 or 3 steps ahead of kids and anticipating what the kids are going to bring them. And so if we know that the average age of kids getting cell phones, and I don't know what that is, but if we say that it's 8 or something, I have no idea, that seems pretty young to me. But then we can know that, you know, kids in that peer group are going to be experiencing that, so we can anticipate. And so we can either start the dialogue before they ask us and be proactive and say, hey, I know that it seems pretty popular or common for kids your age, and your dad and I talked about it, or however the conversation goes, and we've decided that this is what we want to see before this happens, whether it's a certain age, whether it's a certain demonstration of responsibilities, whether it's a certain demonstration of social skills. So you could be proactive and you could initiate the conversation. The other thing that I think about is just you deciding like what your requirements will be before saying yes. So,
And I think preempting with that with, because I love you and because I care about you, this is my decision.
The child is seeing other children on the phone. That places a certain value in that child. That if I don't have a phone, I'm not as valuable. So if a parent can, just like Dawn says, if a parent can establish that, hey, you know what? I'm not getting a phone, but I'm still establishing the value. And if there's already that relationship there, then that's going to help, not take it all away, but it's going to help that child be able to navigate through the why I can't.
I would ask too, does your child need the phone or do they want the phone? Because as parents, you always have to say, what does my child need and what does my child want? And do they need everything that they want? Because how many things did you want as a child that you didn't get and you're just fine now? For me, it was a my size Barbie, never got it, but I seem to be doing pretty okay without her. So is your child going to be okay if you make them wait another year, another 2 years? So make yourself the pros and cons list. What are the benefits of giving that to my child? What are the potential risks? And what are they going to use the phone for? What is the reason that they need the phone in their eyes? And what are you willing to let them do with it?
And remember, they're coming from that emotional standpoint. Either everybody has one, and they'll become great negotiators. Well, if there's an emergency, I will need to get in touch with you. Stay strong.
Use your friend's phone.
You know all these other kids have phones. There you go.
We have another question right over here on the third row on this side here. I could sing during the moments.
Thank you for being here. One question is, a kid coming and asking you, I need to do this particular thing to be a part of a group in the class. Dad or mom, I know it is wrong, but to be a part of that particular group in my class, I have to do this. So how do you approach that?
Why do you have to do it? What is the consequences if you don't do it? How can I help you deal with those consequences? Getting involved in that child's life. Again, you have to have that relationship to begin with. It's not something you haven't done and now all of a sudden you're going to start to get involved because they don't have that trust relationship. But if a parent has a bond with their child and that child is faced with that dilemma, which we all have it, they're always going to be there. Okay, how can I help you navigate through that dilemma and help you to not have to go with the crowd?
And I think you need to celebrate the fact that you've already achieved one of the greatest barriers. If they're coming to you and they're saying, I want to be part of this, or they're asking me to be part of this, that trust and their look for guidance to you, I mean, that's huge. That's huge.
I agree with both of those. And I also think that sometimes it can be helpful so if we talk with them and help them discover why are we feeling pressure, where is the pressure coming from, and working on building that relationship that we have with the kids, but then they have to go back to school and deal with the pressure that they're feeling at school, deal with the pressure that they're feeling from their peers. And so I think sometimes helping kids develop a plan for how they'll cope at school or how they might answer if somebody says, we all have phones, why don't you have a phone? And maybe we can help them develop some words or some phrases, or help them develop some coping strategies for that stress over there, which is what brought them with the question to begin with.
And check in and recognize if they were able to overcome that. And that's an example of resiliency right there. See, it wasn't that bad. You did it.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am, in the front here.
One of the things that you guys talked about earlier was that the phones and the social media doesn't cause the depression and the anxiety and the stress. That we tend to already have those things and we seek that little device to make us feel better, but sometimes it doesn't. It makes us feel worse. So, our kids bury themselves into the phone. And so how do you know, what kind of signs do you look for to know whether, are they seeking and getting a positive outcome from that, or are they getting a negative outcome from that? I mean, how do you know the difference if they're just always trying to be engrossed in anyways, if they're having those depression, anxiety feelings to, how do you find that difference?
That's such a good question. I might add, so one way to think about this is to think about change, right? And so in some ways that you can think about, when is this behavior different than what it used to be? Have they given up what they used to do? Are they not spending time with the friends that they used to spend time with? If those kind of changes have happened and have also been happening at the same time as adopting a lot more use of the phone, spending a lot more time isolated, spending time hoping to get that kind of, as you're saying, kind of a social fix from it, I think it's a pretty good sign that it's good to try to have a conversation about it. Your second question, which is more, how do you know whether what they're getting out of it is good or not? That's a little more complicated. The hard part is I don't think there is any surefire way, if you don't have an existing dialogue with your child, to be able to ask whether it's good or bad. But the questions you want to ask are ones sort of like, just kind of, what are you doing when you're on there? What kinds of things are you talking about? In the same way that you might ask them, like, when you spent time with friends, what did you do? What were you playing with or whatever? Do you see what I'm getting at? So the idea is that, unfortunately, some of that is only going to come from their perspective. Kind of an objective standard of what's good or bad is something that is very much a personal experience and not one that you can probably, as a parent, without, which I don't recommend, just watching over their shoulder constantly and to be able to answer. And even then, you may not know.
Is that the helicopter parenting over their shoulder constantly?
Right, because in some ways we want them to develop socially. We want them to learn how to use those devices to socially interact because they're going to.
I try to helicopter a parent at 11 o'clock at night when they don't have their phone, and I can see what it says.
Well, and I might mention rules like you cannot use your phone after a certain time of night. Those are good rules, right? To be able to say these devices are not allowable in those ways makes sense. There's other reasons also to not look at a blue screen at 11 o'clock at night. It's bad for sleep, etc. But the point is that those, again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier, is setting limits on these media are really important. But we don't want to think of the media as necessarily being, just like anything, if you eat too much food of any type, if you watch too much TV, if you do anything to excess, it's generally not good for you.
I think also, just to add on to what Jeffrey was saying, not only asking them, what are you doing on, like what kind of activities you're doing, but then asking them how it affected them.
Right.
How did it make you feel? Did you feel happy and satisfied and engaged and uplifted when you were engaged in that activity or afterwards, or did you feel disappointed or criticized or dissatisfied? And find out what their response is to it, and that can often tell us, because our feelings, our emotions communicate with us about what's happening in our environment and what's happening to us. And so if somebody feels frustrated, angry, sad, discouraged, that can be an indicator that if they feel connected and
They're having fun. A story I might share with you, my older brother shared this with me with his eldest daughter, who, although is not on social media a lot, one of the things that's interesting is she has starting to have these experiences where she sees her friends having done a party or whatever, and she's like, why didn't I get invited? I feel so left out. And my brother and his wife have to remind her, you actually chose not to go to that party. you were doing these events instead. You elected to not be there. It wasn't that you were not invited. You chose. That's actually really important for kids to learn, that their choices have consequences, social consequences. So that feeling of being left out, which is our FOMO, as people call it, right? Feeling of missing out, that's very common. But unpacking that psychologically to go, that doesn't mean you're bad or they meant to exclude you or those pictures were to mock you for your lack of participation. Those are intense emotions which are not consistent with the actual experience. So it's going to take some unpacking. But I think that's an outstanding suggestion to follow up, yeah.
I think too is also, it's a scale, is if that social media becomes more of their reality than actual reality. This little boy every day that would come in and tell me this story about Maury and everything that Maury did. And here I am thinking this is his brother, somebody in the house, and oh, Maury stole this and Maury did that, and oh my gosh, and we're talking about, oh my goodness, oh my God. It's a game, and he wasn't experiencing real relationships. He actually was becoming part of this game. And we had some conversations with his grandma about maybe shutting it down, and he didn't have an environment outside of club time that was conducive for him to be able to do that. But that was becoming his reality and his world, and that was his group of friends, and none of it was real. It was all just this game. And so it's really having a good temperature gauge on, where is the realness of the experiences that you're having versus your life in the technology world.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am, in the back.
My kiddos are younger and they don't have phones yet, but like you've said, I'd like them to learn how to use them in the safety of our home before they fly away. And one question I have about when that happens, should I look through their phone? I have a friend who looks through, she tells her kiddos, this is actually my phone, and I will look through it at any time, and goes through the entire phone. And I understand that point of view, wanting to keep them safe. But like you said earlier, you talk to your girlfriend on the phone after faking talking to time temperature. At what point is that a violation of privacy? Is it okay to look through your kid's phone?
There's a lot of parents out here who are shaking their head, or I can see on their face, they're very interested in this, as am I.
Yeah, no pressure, right? I actually don't, I wish that this was something that I had better research on so I could inform you beyond my guess, right? And I think that there's a balance between privacy and a concern for your kids. I also think that if you think about it, what you're trying to do is be able to operate with those devices in the future on their own too. I mean, as a person who's a college professor, I see a lot of young adults who perhaps could have used better lessons in the home about how to regulate their use of media. And I don't just mean social media, I mean across the board. It's a really real phenomenon to make other people feel neglected when you're constantly attending your phone, which is something we talked about at the beginning of this conversation. I personally might err on the side of thinking of an age point in which that you're like, I really want them to be able to be treated like an adult, and I believe that they're capable of it. I think someone said earlier you have to judge that on a kid-by-kid basis. However, I'm not an expert. I wish I could draw from research on this one, but I don't have a good answer beyond that.
I would say too, if you're not willing to give it to them and trust that they don't need you to monitor everything, then they probably aren't ready for the phone or device. So if you're worried that, your kid has a really tough time with interactions with others, being respectful, maybe you think your child's going to look into things that they shouldn't be looking into, then it's probably not the time for them to have that device yet, because the age of child, that's important, but your child and their development and their reality is more important.
There's other examples as parents that we have boundaries that we set for our children for safety reasons. We don't let them get on a swing at a certain age until they're ready to hold on to the chains. We certainly don't give them the keys of the car just because their friend has a car and they go driving around. If you hunt, you don't just put a gun in your kid's hand if you're responsible parents and say, okay, go time to hunt now, because they haven't learned gun safety. I think that the technology world is exactly the same thing. It's a good tool. It gets things done. It gets us going places. But we, for some reason, feel because everybody's got it, that we don't have to have any limits on it. And so parents need to be responsible, not either monitor everything. When is a child ready? And what have they demonstrated to us that they are ready? You know, my dad, he said, okay, here's the keys of the car. Here's the driveway. You start it, you back up, you go forward. You back up, you go forward. I said, okay, I did that. He said, not enough. Back up, go forward. I did it for like 5 months. Now you get to go out by the mailbox and then come back again. Did it for about a year. Okay, well, I wasn't 18 when I was doing that. I was a lot younger. But the point is that he wanted to see if I was going to handle this okay before he gave me more access to it. And somehow we got to figure technology in the same way. It's a little harder, but it still has to be analyzed in, I think, a similar way.
I think too, it's being in tune into your kid's behavior, and that's when you really use that as a tool. I had this very same conversation with my son about monitoring his phone, and we had some great dialogue about him not feeling like I trusted him, and how he did feel like that was an invasion. You know, he was starting to reach out to girls, and you know, he didn't want me, and I needed to respect him, especially being vulnerable with me and telling me how he felt. Of course, my first, response was, well, I paid for that phone, and I own that phone, and I have but in listening to his position, but use it as a tool. I mean, if his behavior changed, if he became more of an introvert, or it was affecting his academics, that would definitely be something that I would monitor a little bit more closely. I know one of the things that was asked for us to think about before we came tonight was, let's give parents some tools on how to monitor better. My experience with that is if kids are gonna figure out a way around filters or figure out a way on being old enough to use Facebook, they're gonna find a way around any tool that we give you. We had a grant from the Attorney General's Office for internet safety that we did all over the state of Kansas. And one year we met with over 130,000 kids. Every single day, not every single week, every single day we got a new notification of a new way that kids were getting around a filter or something of how parents were being able to monitor. I'll never forget the first one because I just thought it was completely brilliant because my son brought it to my attention. It was Facebook. And being able to kind of monitor what was going on in Facebook. And my son came up to me and he was just like, Mom, think about it. I have a whole other account set up that you don't even know about. So just always be mindful that what you see may not be what's behind the curtain. And so when you're teaching your kids about trust and privacy, those are also life lessons as well, that they may get a little bit more creative on how to get around what you don't want to see.
We did have a question for a parent, or from a parent, and since we're kind of on the topic, we had a parent who asked, are there apps out there? And I know prior to starting tonight, there were a couple of ideas that we knew of, and not necessarily because we had used these, so disclaimer there, but are ones that you could research. And you heard of one.
So I recently heard of Circle by Disney, and so that's one that I think is becoming pretty popular. And I am not very tech savvy, so I don't know how it works, but you basically set it up in your home and it connects to your Wi-Fi, and it allows you the opportunity to kind of filter what your kid can do. Actually, your whole family, you can do it to anybody in your house, but also you can personalize who can have access to what, and you can put time limits on things. It has kind of like a sleep timer, so what it can do is completely shut data off for your children's devices for certain hours after so much usage, so it's essentially shutting your kids down. But then I believe, from what I understand, there's also kind of ways that you can monitor and see what's happening too. So Circle by Disney, I think it's $99. I'm not selling it to you, I'm interested.
There's some pending legislation around the country in regards to future technological devices to where there would be a pre-filter on those that you would have to opt out to be able to get. One of the individuals that is promoting that, and was just in Kansas last week, was a Jessica Neely, talking to our state legislators in regards to having, go state by state, have them pass laws that if you're Verizon or Sprint or whoever, you would have to sell the new device with a pre-filter on it. In order to unlock that, you would have to pay $20 to get that unlocked. So there would be an intentionality, and those dollars would come back into support programs for rehabilitation for people who have fallen into internet pornography and those kind of things. Jessica happens to be a former porn star. And she was in the life for a long time, and she was a person who began to traffic other women into pornography. And she faced 30 years in penitentiary. And so, long story short, she has totally had a change in her life, and now she's going around talking about the effects of pornography. She was also a pastor's daughter who became a youth minister, and due to a trauma in her life, a very sexual trauma because of a rape, she became very depressed, medical issues, and she became a vulnerable person who the traffickers then got to go into pornography. And so there are people like that who are speaking, and so the comments were, what about the First Amendment? And she said, you know, if you go into a convenience store and there's pornography on the shelf, there's a brown wrapper around it. That's not because the people don't want you to see free porn. That's because somebody said there needs to be a brown wrapper around that for children. And she said it's the same exact same thing here. We need to put a brown wrapper around the internet for children so they don't expose to it unless you intentionally decide to do it for them.
Other questions? Sure, yes. I think what I would like to do is just maybe in about 30 seconds or less, if each of you could just give one takeaway for parents, one specific thing that they can walk out of here and do, whether it's something they can start doing or maybe even stop doing that relates to building healthy skills in children, or maybe it's boundaries with social media or something like that. Because I know as parents, sometimes we just need ideas, right, for how to work with our kids. So take about 20 seconds and think about that, what you want to say. And while they're thinking about it, I do want to say this. As a parent, I'm sitting here listening to our experts talk, and I wish I had 24/7 access to people like this that I could just run to and say, hey, I have this question real quick. This is what I'm dealing with right now, right? But if anything, I think one of the things I've taken away tonight is that there's a lot of other people who have the exact same questions that I have. And it reinforces to me the importance that I have relationships, healthy relationships with other parents that I can go to talk to about some of these things, because I'm not the only one who's trying to navigate this really strange period in my child's life. So with that said, Dawn, if I could start with you, and we'll just go down the line very quickly.
Sure. I think mine's pretty simplistic. I'll probably end up where I started, and it's really to be present. And being a parent is a really hard job. Being a kid is really hard these days. And to be present and to enjoy every moment that you possibly can in dialogue, and be conscious of where your attention is at. And when your child is there, have it be on your child. Even if it's on something silly that you're talking about, that has so much incredible meaning to them and will transform them as young people. Thank you.
I think that I would encourage parents to really make sure that they're taking care of themselves. So make sure that you're maintaining your own health, your own mental health, so that you maintaining your boundaries, so that you can be healthy. And so if you're healthy, then you can model health, and then you can then attend and be present and give child rearing the energy that it needs. So make sure that you're taking care of yourselves.
How many of you had an electronic device that's gone off since you've been in the room tonight? Yeah, congratulations.
Appreciate your honesty.
So you can do it. I know mine in my pocket has gone off about 20 times. So, but I'm an emergency provider. There's one thing that we all need, and that's to know we're significant. You want to know it, I want to know it, so do your children. just make sure they know that they're significant. And they really want to know mostly from you.
I guess I would only add that it's not that you use it, it's how you use it.
And then what I would say is think of what was the greatest memory you have as a child, and then how can you recreate that for your child? Was it on a device, or was it playing? Was it a vacation? Was it time with a family member? So are you providing to your child right now what will give them the greatest memory of their life?
Great. Thank you very much. If you would give them a thank you.
It's amazing being around kids every day. I've always said I've either been a kid or been around kids my entire life. And I've learned a lot tonight. So I appreciate your expertise and your honesty and your willingness to come share this space with us. Couple of things. I learned at a very early age with my kids the words, "I love you too much to argue." And that is something that I use with my own, I have 3 kids that I use with them all the time. I explain and I would listen, but after a while, I love you too much to argue because I am your mom and I love you more than anybody else in the world. So I'm going to help continue to raise you to be the very best you can be. One of the things, I don't know if anybody noticed the backdrop of our panelists tonight. I don't know if I think I heard someone say, is this where they teach kindergarten? This is not where we teach kindergarten in this space, but I loved the backdrop. Kindergarten, when we grow up, and all those different images of what kids think of when they grow up. We actually have an assembly. Every student in our school is a part of a class play, and tomorrow morning, our kindergartners are giving their class play. So I just wanted to explain that because someone said to me earlier, wow, you teach kindergarten on a stage. No? But it sure is. It's a great set, isn't it? But it's a great reflection that we want all of our students and our kids to grow up, and we have dreams for them. And whether they're going to be a firefighter or a psychologist or a counselor, whatever they're going to be, we want to help them grow up. The final thing, and my last bit of as a parent, one thing I learned with social media that I believe has helped me is when my student will say, or my kid will say to me, "You don't trust me. If you trusted me, you'd let me be on my phone or my iPad and do whatever." And I said, "Absolutely, I trust you. It's all those people out there that I don't know what they're going to say to you." And I know that when we, growing up, had to deal with kids not being nice to us, whether it was friends or acquaintances or somebody who just had conflict, you dealt with it at school, and then you went home, and you were in the safety of your home, and by the time you slept on it and went back to school the next day, you'd kind of gotten over it. The problem is that 24-hour rule now. If they have their phone by their bed, they have it all night long. And sometimes we just don't know what messages are coming in. So I trust my kids. I can't control anybody else. And so that's why that limit, we talked about the limits of, time and at, a certain time at night we shut it down. That's because you're protecting them from what might be coming in. Because the bullying or the taunting or the teasing or just the conversations, you can't control that, what comes in. So you have to control what's in the boundaries of your home for the time. So I appreciate you guys so very much. I appreciate Manning Music. They donated all the equipment and their technician tonight for us to have this. We appreciate them very much. I appreciate Chris Williams for doing this and our Parent Association. Thank you so very much. As a school, we believe these are important to our community. We do a couple of these a year. We had an author in the fall, and we had this now. So we hope you'll keep checking us out on our website. Look for our resources on our website, and we welcome you anytime. Our door is always open, and we're a resource to you as a community. So thank you so much for coming. Have a great evening.